Hi, welcome to our channel of IGNOU audiobooks, Indira Gandhi National Open University, School of Continuing Education, SOCE, Diploma Postgraduate Diploma Programs, Postgraduate Diploma Program in Rural Development, PGDRD, Revised, Compulsory Course, MRD, 201 Rural Development, Indian Context, Block-1 Rural Society, Unit-1 Introduction to Rural Society.
Society 1.0 aims and objectives. This unit aims to introducing the rural society in India from development perspective. After having gone through this unit, you will be able to times understand different perspectives on rural society, times define rural society, times differentiate between tribal, peasant, and urban societies, times identify types of village in India and 1.1 Introduction. Rural development is a process of social change that always takes place in the context of a society, whether it is rural or urban. In order to understand the processes of social change and development, particularly in the context of rural society, one must know about the concept of society in general and the concept of rural society in particular. Since this course is to discuss rural development in Indian context, one has to understand the Indian rural society in terms of its social, economic and political structures and their relationship with its urban counterpart. So, the first block of the course is devoted to the understanding of rural society in India. The first unit of the block introduces the nature of the Indian rural society, and the unit begins with the concept of rural society. 1.2 Concept of rural society. Basically, the term society refers to an organized and all-inclusive life of people. It is a dynamic whole of interrelated social, cultural, economic and political aspects of people. The ecological setting of rural society is different because it is natural, and its natural setting distinguishes it from the one which is formed in an artificial setting. A society existing in a setting with more natural features denotes a rural society, and the one with artificial setting is an urban society. The different aspects of rural society, such as demographic, socio-cultural, economic, political, physical, and ecological, are focused differently by different disciplines, but they are complementary to each other. A complete understanding of the society can be obtained only by a proper integration of all contributions made by various disciples. The integration of various viewpoints is important for a better understanding of the social phenomena of rural development because it covers multiple disciplines and viewpoints. From the viewpoint of rural development, one primarily needs to focus on dynamism of a rural society as a whole and in its different aspects. Dynamism of a rural society can be explained in terms of multiple groups and functional specialization that have taken place across its different aspects in course of time. This is what we call rural development as well. It is due to difference of development that rural societies differ in terms of size, resources, differentiation, functional specialization, and organization. The term rural society is used almost interchangeably with terms like village, countryside, or folk society. Of these terms, village is most commonly used for rural society in disciplines like sociology, anthropology, and others. The term countryside is popular in the Western world, which primarily denotes a simple place as compared to the complex place of urban life. One may choose to retire to a simple place as compared to the complex place of urban life. One may like to choose to restive to a simple place of the countryside. although it is not a place of facilities and opportunities. What it lacks is the fast life of the city. In the scheme of the rural-urban continuum, Robert Redfield conceives rural and urban as one of the two extreme poles. In between them lies the interface. The rural society is like the folklore society, as it consists of tribal peoples also who are characterized by their folks and laws. The tribal people are traditional, indigenous, and homogeneous. They can best be understood in terms of their culture and in contrast with the fast-changing and heterogeneous urban society. A folk society is past-oriented because its members are content with their lot and with what they have. They proudly hold their tradition and the conventional modes of social behavior and thought. The tribal and non-tribal people live in villages and they are relatively less development. In comparison to rural society, urban society is future-oriented and not satisfied like the rural society. They are forward-looking while the ruralite folk society is backward-looking. If the change characterized the urban society, stability characterized the folk society. Comparatively, rural society is smaller in terms of size, density of population, and physical area. It has less institutional services. A sizable number of its population is engaged in agriculture as their mainstay, and there exist other groups, such as artisans and craftsmen who regularly supply their services to agriculturalists in exchange for grains and cereals or cash. It has some full-time and a large number of part-time specialists as craftsmen and artisans who also partly indulge in agricultural pursuits to produce mainly for domestic consumption. The rural society is the repository of traditional mores and folkways. The degree of difference in development and natural sustenance defines a rural society and differentiates it from its urban counterpart. Now, rural society is also seen to be on the move towards urbanization, but the urban areas are also ruralized due to rural to urban and urban to rural migration, although the degree of migration varies. This change as a result of two-way process of migration is irreversible. One can see change taking place in rural and urban areas. Some urban people may purchase farm lands in rural areas and go there to stay in farmhouses with all urban facilities available to them in the rural area. A better conceptualization of rural society in the era of development can be obtained from the discussion on changing perception of rural-urban relationship given in the Unit 4. 1.3 Rural Society in India. According to 2011 census, 68.84% of Indians live in 5,97,608 inhabited villages. In 1901, 89.2% of Indians used to live in villages. In 1961, this percentage had reduced to 82.03, and in 1991 it further declined to 74.5%. This declining trend is bound to continue. However, even today a significant proportion of Indians lives and derives livelihood in villages. In this context, rural society in India assumes considerable significance. The rural society refers to village but from the viewpoint of revenue collection. It is a revenue village which may be a cluster of small villages. In the census of India, village is an entity identified by its name and a definite boundary. Indian villages exhibit a great deal of diversity not only in terms of size of population and area but also in terms of resources, economy, culture and social structure. There are poor and affluent villages. The affluent villages of Punjab, for example, are those villages where family members receive handsome amount of money regularly from those of their young members who live and work abroad. Some writers have termed such villages as grey villages because they have large populations of old people whose children are away. At one time, many of these old people also were away working in foreign lands, and after making sufficient wealth, they returned to their soil to lead retired lives or to work as commercial farmers. There are also poor villages of Bihar, Jharkhand, Odisha, or Chhattisgarh where for 1 square meal the parents are sometimes forced to sell their children to liquor vendors or money lenders. Several villages in arid parts of Rajasthan are now uninhabited because of inhospitable environment. The villages situated at the outskirts of towns and cities are usually known as fringe villages. They undergo gradual transformation as they lose their identity gradually and eventually become parts of the urban world. For example, New Delhi, where many residential colonies, such as Wazirpur, Patparganj, Mohammadpur, Chandraval, etc., are named after the villages that used to exist there earlier, but have now been completely assimilated with the expanding universe of urban life. Some villages have now grown into towns, such as Kohima. On the other hand, there are villages situated in remote and backward areas deep in hilly, forest and desert terrains where villagers rarely come in contact with cities. In addition, there are castes community-based villages, single caste and multi-caste villages. Some villages are more developed than others in terms of material possessions and facilities such as electricity, schools, dispensaries, etc. While moving from one region to the other and from one state to another, one comes across immense diversity in the lifestyles and material conditions of villages. Notwithstanding the huge variation that is bound to take place in a vast country like India, there are certain general features that rural communities in India have in common. Let us discuss these features of rural society. Villages in India. You know that villages have been classified on the basis of size also. According to the Census of India, 2011, 76.46% of the villages had less than 5,000 people. According to the size of population, the villages were divided into 7 categories. 0.98% villages inhabited by less than 200 persons, 2. 4.76% villages inhabited by 200 to 499 persons, 3. 12.39% villages inhabited by 500 to 999 persons, 4. 23.69% villages inhabited by 1000 to 1999 population. 34.64% villages inhabited by 4,999, 6. 14.86% villages inhabited by 5,000 to 9,999 and 7. 8.68% villages inhabited by 10,000 and above. An increased number of villages is recorded in the population size of 1,000 to 1999, 2,000 to 4,999, 5,000 to 9,999, and 10,000 plus. Whereas a decrease in number of villages is seen in the population size of less than 500 and 500 to 999. Clearly, the number of villages with the small population size of population has declined. Another classification of Indian villages divides them into nucleated and dispersed villages. It is well known that villages comprise homestead land, abadi, and cultivable land. In nucleated villages, all the households are clustered together in a compact unit, surrounded on all sides by cultivable land. When households are distributed over a large area, and each cluster of a few houses is separated by cultivable land, it is known as a dispersed village. Most of the villages in India are of compact nucleated type. Dispersed villages are found in the coastal areas of Kerala in South India, in Bhil, settlements to the east and north of Gujarat, and in Coorg and western Mysore. M.N. Srinivas proposes that detailed studies of these two types of village need to be carried out to see differences in their respective organizational patterns. For example, he notes that in nucleated villages the responsibility of defending the village from robbers and wild animals falls on all the inhabitants. In dispersed villages, each farm has to protect itself against the enemies. The kin group owning the farm must have enough people to defend itself when the need arises. It is quite likely that houses in dispersed villages are built with an eye to defense. One may hypothesize that dispersed villages are associated with large kinship groups and martial traditions. 1.3.1 Agriculturists, tribes, peasants and farmers. Rural society is largely an agrarian society that includes a wide variety of people, such as agriculturalists, artisans, craftsmen, and other occupational groups who all depend, in one way or the other, upon agriculture, but these are not the only people who live in villages. Communities of people, who are called Tiavanbilis, also live in villages, and some of them have been in long-standing relations with other non-tribal communities. There are also villages exclusively of tribal persons and peasants. To distinguish between them, sociologists have used the concepts of tribes and peasants. According to the draft of National Policy on Tribal Populations of India, circulated in 2006, there are 67.8 million scheduled tribes, constituting about 8.08% of India's population. There are 698 scheduled tribes spread all over India, barring the states of Haryana and Punjab and the Union territories of Chandigarh, Delhi and Pondicherry. By definition, the scheduled tribes are those people who are notified as such by the President of India under Article 342 of the Constitution of India. The first notification in this regard was issued in 1950. Several characteristics, such as the primitive traits of the tribe, distinctive tribal culture, geographical isolation of tribes and their socio-economic backwardness, are considered before notifying a tribe as scheduled tribe. 75 of the 698 scheduled tribes are identified as primitive tribal groups. They are more backward than the scheduled tribes. They continue to live in a pre-agricultural stage of economy and have very low literacy rates. Their populations are stagnant or even declining. From their life, it is clear that in defining tribe, emphasis is laid on the isolation of its members from the wider external world and their negligible relations with other communities. They tend to develop their own culture, which has little resemblance with the culture of other communities, which have enjoyed long-term interaction among themselves and with other communities. It is due to this that tribal communities in anthropological literature are known as cultural isolates. We cannot understand the tribal societies well without studying their external world from which they are excluded. A tribal society is characteristically a holistic, complete society. The term peasant shot into prominence with the works of Robert Redfield. Peasants are definitely rural. They live in relation to market towns. They are part of the larger population, but they lack self-sufficiency and retain much of their old identity, integration, and attachment to soil and their cults. If tribes are isolated, peasants are not. They are agriculturalists, attached to soil, as Kroeber observes. They intend to produce primarily for their own subsistence, but they have to produce surplus to transfer and sell the surplus to the markets located in urban areas so that they acquire the things they do not produce. Peasants are dependent upon urban markets, the consequence of which is that they are constantly in touch with urban societies. Along with the mechanization of agriculture, there are nowadays seen tractor repair mechanics and operators of tractor, hand tiller machine, crop cutters, thrasher machines, grain winnowers, flour mill, and oil mill in villages. They are also part-time agriculturists along with full-time service providers. In a village, all the groups together constitute the rural society in India. This society stands not isolated but in relation to the urban society. Before we proceed to discuss relationship between the two societies, let me check your progress. 1.4 Rural and urban societies in India. The interrelation. Broadly, Indian society consists of three segments, namely tribal, rural, and urban societies represented by the hamlet, the village, and the city. They are interrelated. They are present in each domain and interact with each other. Although each society has its own characteristics, they are all only part societies within the larger whole. They stand not at equidistance from each other. The tribal and rural societies are situated relatively close to nature and share greater part of rural society. Let us now discuss their interactions to understand the nature of the rural society. Over a period of time, rural society in India has undergone variety of changes. Some of them are assimilated into urban societies and some start resembling urban societies in certain material and social terms, but the rural society retains its identity as a village. It may be so because of the location and nature of activities. Villages closer to the centers of urban growth are likely to change more appreciably and faster than their counterparts located in interior parts of rural areas. With the passage of time, villages may grow into towns which eventually grow into cities. Continuity may be noticed in the transition from the village to the city. For cities which grow from the village, Robert Redfield and Milton Singer used the term orthogenetic cities. These cities emerge from below, i.e., from the village, rather than getting imposed on a population from outside. When a city is imposed on a populace, as happened during the colonial period in India, it is called heterogametic city. Such a city, emerging from above, does not have its origin in local villages. The social consequences of these two types of city are not alike. In orthogenetic city, the migrants coming from villages will have less of a culture shock on encountering the city and will not suffer much from some sort of cultural inadequacy while dealing with the city dwellers. By contrast, the experience of both the culture shock and the feeling of cultural inadequacy will be tremendously high for rural migrants in a heterogametic city. It is so because an orthogenetic city carries forward the traditions of the village, and the villagers can identify the segments of their culture in it and can relate with them easily. In a heterogametic city, by contrast, members will feel completely out of place because such a city contains the elements of a tradition which grew somewhere else, with which the local people have no familiarity. Consequently, they will feel out of place in it. Succinctly, rural and urban areas are generally dependent upon each other and have a mutually supportive relationship between them in economic, political, social, and cultural life. Let us see this relationship between village and the city in India. 1.4.1 Nature of village. Villages are principally food producing units and they are agriculture based. They produce not only for their own subsistence but also for the urban societies, which are non food producing units. A tribal society in theoretical terms has subsistence economy, people produce primarily for their own consumption. Tribal economy does not generate surplus. A peasant society, in contrast, has to generate surplus not only for acquiring things that it does not produce, but also for the city. Those who produce on a mass scale for commercial purpose are known as farmers. All the producers, whether they are peasants or farmers, supply food to cities. The city dwellers, once their economic needs are met with, devote themselves to the development of arts and crafts and other non-agricultural pursuits. The innovations that take place in cities affect to villages. Thus, in economic terms, land is the primary means of production in rural societies, whereas in industrial urban cities the production and distribution of industrial goods and services becomes the primary resource base. So, there is a highly diversified occupational structure and a greater degree of occupational specialization in the city. Thus, full-time specialists, whose occupations require higher education and skills, characterize urban societies invariably. In addition, semi-skilled and unskilled workers who support specialists in various ways are also found in cities. Economic interaction is closely linked with the political. Although each village has its own council, a panchayat in India, which takes up and resolves disputes between individuals and communities in the village, but the ultimate seat of authority controlling villages is situated in urban areas. The political power centered in cities controls villages. Prices of goods that villagers bring to city markets to sell are decided by urban political powers. Often, villagers protest against such controls. We are familiar with the protests made by Indian farmers when the prices of sugarcane or oilseeds are fixed much below the expectation of their producers. The practice of internal mobilization for achieving their objectives is not unknown among village communities, but sometimes it does not build up enough strength because of lack of support or poor publicity. The result is that villagers' exploitation at the hands of the city powers continues unabated. Marshal Sahlins has called peasants underdogs who are not able to muster enough revolutionary fervor to bring about a change in their state of existence. Along with economic dependence, villages are also politically dependent upon cities. In both economic and political terms, the city enjoys supremacy over the village. The economic and political aspects of rural society connect with their social and cultural aspects. Rural societies are relatively more homogeneous in terms of their social and economic characteristics. Their technological and organizational aspects are also simpler in the sense that they can be learned easily. Also, changes among rural societies occur at a slower pace. The villagers have restricted geographical, social, and economic areas of interaction. That is why rural societies are called small-scale societies. The role of tradition in controlling the behavior of people is very strong. Religion also plays a significant role in governing the lives of people, and individuals have limited freedom to choose their occupations or mates. In other words, the range of choice among the rural people is highly restricted. Their territorial, occupational, and upward social mobility is also limited. 1.4 Point to nature of city. In contrast to villages, urban societies are characterized, as Lewis Worth noted, by large size, high density of population, and heterogeneity. Cities have a large population, and its growth is much faster because of the migration of people from rural to urban areas. In villages, the rate of growth of population is slower, and the population mostly increases as a result of high birth rate. Migration of people to villages is comparatively much less. Surely, there have been cases of tribal people migrating to villages in search of subsistence, but their number is too negligible to bring about any significant change in the village. Cities are cultural mosaics. They have people from different cultures and backgrounds. The way of life of people shows a wide variety. The range with respect to income, housing, education, etc. is quite large. Technology is quite complex, and its knowledge cannot be acquired at home, as happens in rural societies. The son of a blacksmith, for example, in a village learns the art of smithy at home by observing the experience of his father and other male relatives at work and holding apprenticeship under them. In urban societies, these crafts become highly sophisticated, and their teaching and learning is transferred to specialized institutions. As technology becomes complex, so do the organizations and the societies that use them. You know that change in urban societies takes place at a fast pace. Urbanites have a larger area of interaction. They interact with people who live in different territories and work in different organizations. In a nutshell, they come in contact with people who hail from different walks of life. For regulating such a wide variety of interaction, the urban society needs to impose, as Worth said, formal mechanisms of social control. Mechanical time records and formal rules become essential for purposefully regulating the urban living. This is in sharp contrast to villages which have face-to-face relationship. Here, the same people meet every day, time and again, with the outcome that each adult knows most of the aspects of the life of the other. Relationships in villages are informal, as compared to formal and specific relationships in urban societies. The same urban dwellers may meet every day for business, but will not develop the kind of intimacy that villagers possess because of regular and socially intense interaction. Relationships in villages are not of the means to ends type, as they are in cities. Mobility, both in space and occupations, is highly pronounced in urban societies as compared to the rural ones. In sum, rural and urban societies can be distinguished in terms of a number of variables, each of which exercises its impact on the other. Cultural features from villages are carried forward to cities where they are refined, systematized and developed. They are then sent back to villages. Similarly, innovations taking place in cities percolate down to villages. 1.4.3 Rural-urban interactions. For analyzing the relationship between rural and urban societies, Robert Redfield used the concept of little community for rural society. Characterized as small in size, largely self-sufficient, homogeneous and relatively isolated. Its members are generally unlettered, i.e., their tradition is not based on reading and writing. They accept their tradition as it is, without subjecting it to any critical scrutiny. Contradictions and paradoxes in their tradition, if any, continue to remain, without any attempt of people to remove or reconcile them. The tradition is accepted as infallible and transcendental. Without question, it forges and maintains unity among the people. It is labeled as little tradition. In brief, it is the tradition of the unlettered and unreflective people, cultivated at home and transmitted from generation to generation by their socialization. City is the type of society with which the little community unremittingly interacts. Redfield and many other scholars have viewed city as the center of civilization. City is also the abode of a group of intellectuals or literati in Redfield's words, whose job is to create the tradition of a higher level by refining and systematizing the little tradition. The tradition of the literati is known as the great tradition. It is the tradition of the lettered people who are few in number and are reflective, i.e., they think about the tradition, make it sophisticated and systematize it, thus making it universal. The tradition is cultivated in separate and distinct institutions, such as temples, mosques, churches, synagogues, etc., and is transmitted as a part of the specialized, rigorous, and long learning for its correct internalization by individuals. If the little tradition is of villagers and of the unlettered people, the great tradition is of cities and of littered people or a group of intellectuals and scholars. The great tradition of the scholars, elites and dominant people is universally held. At the same time, it is to be realized that little and great traditions are ideal types, while in reality the situation is complex. Redfield's approach is popularly known as the cultural approach because he looks at the interaction of the lifestyles of the two communities, the village and the city. This interaction is an outcome of the relative dependence, economic and political, of one on the other. Little traditions and great traditions interact constantly, as a result of which continuity is established between them. Cultural traits from the little tradition are carried forward to the great tradition where they are systematized. As great traditions have universal applicability, the cultural elements they systematize also become universal. Accordingly, the process whereby cultural features of the little traditions become parts of the great traditions is known as universalization, a term proposed by Redfield. The reverse process of the mobility of cultural traits from the great tradition to become parts of the little tradition is also possible. A little tradition has a narrow coverage and is confined to a local area. When it accepts elements from the great tradition, it might modify them so that they are compatible with the characteristics of the society in general. As the incoming cultural traits are changed and colored to suit local conditions, knowledge and thoughts, the process is termed localization or parochialization. These terms were used for the first time in Makki famous article on the village of Kishangarhi in Aligarh. Many scholars think that Redfield's analysis is extremely simple for understanding the complexities of Indian civilization. Some propose the idea of multiple traditions in India rather than just two traditions. But the concepts of little and great traditions help us greatly in understanding the cultural continuity between villages and cities in India. In this context, certain observations of Milton Singer, which are given below, are highly relevant. Times the Indian civilization has evolved out of the folk and regional cultures. The local stories and folklore have evolved into great epics, such as Ramayana, Mahabharata, and other religious scriptures after being refined and systematized over a long period of time. Time's cultural continuity is a major feature of the great traditions. It is based on the idea that people throughout the country share common cultural consciousness. Time's consensus exists in India about sacred books and sacred objects. It is one of the major bases of a common cultural consciousness that people in India share. Time's cultural continuity with the past is a major feature of the Indian society. As a result, most of the modernizing thoughts and ideologies of progress do not lead to a linear form of social and cultural change. Rather, the modern institutions are traditionalized in India. They adapt the social organization of communities instead of constraining them to adapt to modernity. Now, let me check your progress. 1.5 Summary. Rural society is part of the total whole. It can be understood in relation to other parts of the whole, such as tribal and urban societies. Their relationship has been analyzed in terms of little traditions and great traditions. However, rural folk and urban societies have significant differences in terms of attitudes and values. While differentiating between the two societies, we have found many types of villages in India, leading us to use the concept of a rural-urban continuum where one of its ends consists of rural societies and the other one of urban societies. These two societies have always been interacting. An Indian village was never a self-sufficient unit. It was always dependent upon the outside world, other villages and cities, for various needs. As a result, the rural society was always a subject to various changes that were introduced from outside. Though with the passage of time the rural population in India has reduced, yet about 69% of India's people still live in villages. Thank you. Subscribe to our channel for more updates.